Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Donnelly. I'm an alcoholic. And Rich is right. I'm a fantastic human being. So thank you. Shall we close? Shall we close? What he didn't tell you, because he's gracious too, is that when I got back to my hotel room and went upstairs just for a couple of minutes before last night's speaker, just sort of unpacked, put the shirt on the hanger, that kind of thing, and walked past the mirror and realized that my fly had been open while I was visiting his home and probably on the 12-hour journey in the airplane. So you can't write this stuff. You really can't. But I truly feel very privileged to be here. Alcoholics Anonymous has absolutely saved my life. It introduced me to a way of living that I didn't know, but frankly, to be candid, had seen witnessed in front of me almost my whole life. My grandmother, my mom, my dad, these were people that naturally did these things that you all had to teach me. They tried to teach me, right? I just, for some reason, man, it just didn't land, you know? But I want to thank Mike and the committee for asking me to come out. I want to thank everybody who served, all the speakers. Let's give it a round of applause for those speakers again. They were great. Really. Great. The dog. Should we give a round of applause to the... Excellent. And frankly, I just want to take a second and acknowledge Mike and Kenny from DICOB. You know, that speakers, it looks like, hey, what a cool thing. You get to travel around and be at conferences. Yeah, that's pretty neat. But the truth is that they carry a ministry to Alcoholics Anonymous that would be vacant to us if they didn't fill that slot. We get to hear guys like Chuck C. and Sandy B. and Joe and Charlie, and even our founders, Bill and Bob, right? And if they weren't doing what they do every single weekend, right, we would not have those opportunities. So let's make sure we acknowledge those folks too. I was born and raised in Chicago. My father, to this day, is still my hero. My dad was a Korean War veteran. When the war ended, he came back to the United States and became a police officer, quickly rose through the ranks, became a lieutenant. My mom was a waitress and a caterer. She ran a business with my grandmother, catering business in Chicago. When I was 6 years old, I have one sister, her name is Patty. She's a couple of years older than me. When I was 6 years old, my dad went off to work as he did every day. Didn't come home. That was not unusual. You can imagine being a police lieutenant in the south side of Chicago. There'd be a little OT involved with that, I guess. And anyways, we could tell this time was different. And what had happened is my dad had an aneurysm in his bowel and artery burst. And he laid in the hospital bed for about 10 days and hemorrhaged to death. And at 42, my dad went home. My mom was about 90 days into a new 30-year mortgage. She was 33 years old. She had my sister, which never caused any problems, and me. And I was just getting going at 6. So, and it was strange. Everything in the home changed. My dad was one of these guys, when he was there, you just felt secure. He was the kind of guy that when he walked into a room, everybody sort of shut up and looked at him. And he could tell a story, and everybody would listen in with great intensity. He was just a great leader of men. He had honor and integrity. He was a man who loved his wife, and he loved his children. And I'm very grateful that I had that man as my dad. And I wear his tie clip every time I get this opportunity because he's just absolutely my hero, like I said. When I was 12 years old, a lot had gone on between 6 and 12. And I want to talk a lot about how I got here, and I want to talk about what's happened since I've been here. So I'm going to bounce pretty quickly through my early years. And when I think back of what happened to me at 12, I don't know how I got there, but I got there. And how I was at 12 is not all that far off from where I'm at today, right? But except I was a little more mature maybe, or thought I was. I don't know. But I don't know what it was, but there were certain things that I found within myself that I don't know if other people felt that way or not. Some of you have, I know, because I've heard your stories, and they sort of align, and that's kind of odd. Right? To the new people that are here, like, my drinking is going to be different than yours, likely. Maybe you were a tequila person. Well, I was on certain days, right? Maybe you were a beer person. I was most of the time, right? Maybe you were a whiskey person. Maybe you drank for 10 years or 14 years or 30 years. Right? And so we're always going to have some differences. Maybe you have 3 DUIs. I have none. Right? Should have had a boatload of them, but I never got one. Right? Maybe you've been divorced 3 times. I couldn't get anyone to marry me. Like, there's a difference. And it's just true, right? I tried. I really tried. Didn't work out very well. For me, great for them, but not for me. So we're going to have some differences, right? And I don't know that that's what we're looking for. I don't know that we're looking for consistency in a drunkalog. I think what we're looking for is what I finally saw in myself that I didn't like at 12. Long before Michael Donnelly ever had a drink, there's been an ache inside of him that he could not fix. A longing for something that was nameless and foggy and distant, and somehow I couldn't reach it no matter what I did. And when I was 12 years old, sitting in a circle with some of my buddies, I thought I got close. I didn't, but I thought I got close. And there was a guy there, he's one of the coolest looking guys I had ever seen in my entire life. He had hair to his mid-back. He had a bandana on with a roach clip and one of those peacock feathers that hang off that you win at like a carnival, right? He had a Black Doors concert t-shirt on and faded bell-bottom jeans. And he said, "Hey, do you guys get high?" And, we were 12 or 13 years old, whatever we were. And we didn't answer him. Like, he was 17, man. We had seen this guy. He was the guy that hung out with the other 17 or 18-year-olds. They had their pickup truck down and one of those huge jam boxes, right? They had like 48D battery shoved in the thing, right? And there's all this music pounding out, and this sort of just lofting bit of smoke that would hover over them all the time. So we were a little scared, So we didn't say much. We just sort of looked at the guy, and he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out what appeared to be a joint and a lighter. And he pitched it in my buddy's lap. And my buddy grabbed the thing and lit it. Starts going around in a circle. And I remember thinking, I guess I'm getting high today. Yep, we can do this, I guess. It wasn't on the to-do list when I woke up, but this is what's happening. And truthfully, I was just afraid to get out of the circle. That's just the truth. I was just afraid to get out of the circle. And so it's coming around, and I remember, don't do this wrong. I remember thinking to myself, don't do this wrong, right? Because this is cool stuff, so you can't do cool badly, right? You got to do cool really well. And I remember thinking, because we'd stolen enough cigarettes from our parents, like we knew how to smoke, right? My mom smoked Vantage 100s, right? So it's very hard to be cool on the south side of Chicago when you're pulling out Vantage 100s. It's a monster cigarette. You need someone else to light it for you because you can't. Turn quickly, burn your buddy in the temple. Like, it's just hard to be cool with a Vantage 100. So we kind of knew what we were doing, but we sort of didn't. And I remember thinking there's 2 things that are different from cigarettes and smoking this joint. The first is how you hold it, right? This is how you hold a cigarette, and this is how you hold a joint. Huge difference. I think we can all agree there. And then the second one is when you smoke a cigarette, you exhale right away, right? But when you're smoking pot, you're supposed to hold it in. And you cannot choke on your dope smoke, or you are like the biggest loser ever. So, grabbed the thing, took a couple of hits, passed it on. Didn't get high, didn't get stoned, didn't eat, Hostess snack cakes and Doritos and stare at blacklight Jimi Hendrix posters. Like, none of that happened. And for all I know, I didn't even smoke pot that day. For all I know, some 17-year-old rolled up some oregano and a zigzag and went over to his buddies and they're like, those 12-year-olds think they're high. Like, I have no idea. Couldn't tell you. But literally 24 hours later, I'm walking down the alley on the south side of Chicago, and a buddy of mine's coming the other way, and he says, "Hey, Mike, do you get high?" Now with all my drug-using experience, a couple of tokes off some Mrs. Dash, right? I'm like, "Yeah, man, I get high." And so he pulls this out, and we smoke that bad boy, and I got to tell you, we ate a ton of Doritos and stared at his older brother's blacklight Jimi Hendrix poster all afternoon. It was really cool. For the next little bit of time, next few years, if you could light it on fire, I was smoking it. It was just sort of easier. And as I sort of grew up, when I got to be about 16 years old, we got wheels. We could get around a little bit. And booze was sort of more easily accessible, right? Like when we were younger, we had to wait till somebody bought us booze, right? Or someone's older brother would go to the liquor store and get it for us. Or somebody had a party and we could go to sort of steal it from our parents or whatever. But 16, man, you could go to the inner city, and as long as you had cash, you could buy anything you wanted. If you went out to the suburbs, it was the same thing. It was just your local neighborhood. It was really a pain in the neck to do, right? And I got to tell you, from the very, very first times I drank very differently than the people I hung out with. You know, drugs are on this list that I have, 2 lists, right? So the first list is like things I've used to cause me to not look at myself. There's a whole bunch of stuff on that list. Drugs are on that list, right? But, you know, so is, I don't know, food, right? And trying to be cool in front of people that I don't know. And sucking in my belly as a teenager when the cute girl walked by. And like all kinds of stuff are on that list, right? Overworking, underworking. Overspending, underspending. Like a whole bunch of stuff is on that list. I got another list. Things that made me feel whole and complete. And I've only found 2 things that have made me feel whole and complete. One is the sense of ease and comfort that I get from taking a few drinks, which I never got with any of the other stuff. I never got that. And the second thing is the God that I found through the miracle of working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll get into more about that later. But by the time I was 16, like I said, I drank differently than everybody. Everybody I knew. I was passing out in back seats, waking up on front lawns. You know, I was a mess. If you were around me, it was likely that at some point we were going to get into some level of altercation. I was going to say something snarky that you used to think was funny, but it's after 9:30 and I've had a 12-pack already, so it's no longer funny. Right? I would find weaknesses in you, and if there were girls around, I could pick on you if you were another guy, and I could pull them out and reveal them in such a snarky, mean way to make you look bad so I would look good. Right? I was the guy that had some comment for the pretty girls at the party, not knowing that the big football player boyfriend was on the other side of the room. You know? I missed 42 days of school my senior year in high school, and I went on to college. Not sure how I got in, but I got in. I had decent grades, I guess, in high school, but I was just a mess. So I get into this school, and I start. The first semester went all right. Second semester was a little bit worse. And by the third semester, I drank my way out of school. I worked at this place called the Flyers Den. It was a campus bar. My buddy was the general manager, and I was the bouncer. And you got about, $15 a night, but you could drink all night, right? And so we'd show up, and I'd drink, and I used to collect money at the door. There was no cover charge, but I recognized that the locals in the area would come to the campus bar to meet college girls, the girls I went to school with, right? That's got to be worth something. You know, I'm a capitalist. I'm studying business. Like it's sort of an apprenticeship. So I would collect $5 from anybody walking in who didn't have a campus ID. And then we go to the bar, this place called the Wild Hammer in Joliet, and I'd buy Tostino's pizza rolls and onion rings and beer all night. And I did that all year long. And I crash landed pretty good. And I remember feeling to myself, like, you got to get this together. Like, you got to get your act together because it's going awry. Like, you can do this. Shh, focus. And I tried. I swear to you, I tried. And no matter how much I tried, there was always this sense of impending doom that sort of hovered over me, feeling like no matter how hard I tried, I just sort of knew it wasn't going to work. And so I'd try for 2 or 3 days and recognize that feeling was accurate, that it wasn't going to work, and then I'd quit. And then I'd start up again and then quit again and then start up again and quit again. And I went out and I had to get a crappy job, and I got a less crappy job, and this went on for a few months, and finally a buddy of mine called me and he said, hey, our company is interviewing a bunch of people out in this place called Bolingbrook, Illinois. It's a little suburb, kind of like by the Naperville area, if you've ever been out in the Chicagoland area. And so I went in this job interview, and they needed 32 sales reps. You're looking at number 32. Had 33 people applied that day. My story would take a turn. I don't know where it'd go, but I got this job. And I remember sitting in this training session, right? And here's all these people with like degrees from University of Illinois or Indiana University or Notre Dame, and then there's me, right? And that's the song of my life. There's you, then there's me. I always felt different and separate. Always felt different and separate. And so I remember thinking, I need to be better than them, right? And so Clancy, one of his talks, he talked about this. He felt like he had to do 10 times the work just to be even with everybody else. And I felt that way, right? I had to do twice as much. I had to be doubly impressive. I had to be extra funny. I had to have better results just to feel even with you because I knew I was already behind you before we even started. Now, I don't know where I got that from. I can tell you, my mom and dad never said that to me. I got to tell you, on the other hand, I heard my mom say that to me 1,000 times. She never did. My mom, by this point in our life, we're struggling. We're struggling to communicate. We're struggling to be kind to each other. Anything she says to me, I know what she means by it. I know what she means. You know, like you walk in the door and she says, "Hi, honey, how was your day?" And I know what she means. Right? I'm embarrassed that you're my son. My God, man, when are you going to grow up? You're pathetic. She never said those things, and I always heard those things. Always heard those things. So this is going on, and and all the stuff that happens to us. I'd get in trouble with the police. I'd get pulled over and lie my way out of a DUI. I was in this bar called Brubaker's on Western Avenue where I used to hang out quite a bit in Chicago. And it's a late night bar. It's open till like 3 a.m. Monday through Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday it's open till 5 a.m. And I'm in this bar drinking, I'm hammered, and I get this thought, my girlfriend's cheating on me. There's absolutely no evidence other than just this recorded message in my head that says she's cheating on me, and it's my job. I'm going to go find her, and I'm going to go make sure that she knows that that's not right. And makes sense, right? I mean, you know. So I drive over to her house, I don't know, 10 or 15 miles away, no big deal, but I'm bombed. And I get on Cicero Avenue. I'm coming home. I see her car in the driveway. Like, it never dawned on me. Like at 3:30, if she was out with somebody else, likely would have been home by then. Never dawned on me. And I get on Cicero Avenue, and I'm going about 45 miles an hour down Cicero, and I'm flashing my brights at these cars, and I'm swerving in and out. And there was this one van that was a couple of blocks ahead of me, and I was really sure he was going to move if I just flashed my brights enough at him. He never did. I came up right behind him and kind of swerved around him. You know what I mean? Kind of almost bullying him out of my lane, right? And when I got even with his vehicle, I just saw color. And I got past his vehicle, which was a second and a half later, just lights. Nothing but cherries, right? A couple of blocks to slow down, I pull into this place called MC Sports. It was a parking lot. And the only thing in my head was lie. Lie like you have never lied before. Reach deep into yourself. Spew it out, man. So you're never supposed to get out of the car. I, of course, get out of the car. And he never met my mom, but he mentioned her a few times in the comments he made at me as I tried to drive him off the road. And a vague remembrance of all of that. But he looks at me and he's like, "What in the heck were you doing?" And I said, "Look, take me to jail. Why not? I mean, it couldn't be worse, right? So I got to call all my relatives, tell them not to fly into town. I'm never going to get the deposit back on the banquet hall, right? The DJ is not returning my calls, so they're not sure. I mean, like, whatever, right? She's gone. Just take me to jail. It's icing on the cake." Okay? Thank you. First of all, only in this crowd would that be impressive, okay? I'm just saying, right? Anyone else would go, "Oh my God." You're like, "Yeah." Okay. So I'm not making this up. His head falls, and he reaches out and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he pats me twice and he goes, I understand, kid. Happened to me 6 months ago." Not making that up. Any of this. So he follows me into a Denny's restaurant and he says, "Here's the deal. You're going to sit here and drink coffee until I leave," which I'm sure he went like halfway around the block and sat and waited for me to leave, right? But fortunately for myself, I had passed out at the table and woke up at about 7 in the morning, and I had a little ring of spit from my saliva. It's a classy story, isn't it? It really is. And I remember driving home, and I remember thinking all the stuff that had happened, like, it's starting to really fall apart. It's starting to really fall apart. All the facades that I had built about how things were okay really began to fall apart. The fiancé was gone. I had a lovely lady in my life. She was so good. I mean, she was really, really a good person, and I hurt her deeply because of my own selfishness and my own boozing and how it could never slow down and it could never stop. And she finally left one day, and she should have. And she should have. I don't know, my family didn't really want to talk to me anymore. They were kind enough where they would, but they didn't really want to. You could see it on them. You could see it on them, the disgust, the shame, the embarrassment in my mom's face. It was bad. I used to break into her front room window and take money out of her purse. I was making 3 to 4 times what she was as a waitress, maybe more, I don't even know. But I used to take money out of her purse and food out of her fridge and booze out of her cabinet. And if you have an Irish Catholic mother, you know what I'm talking about when I say this. My mom never locked the window. Right? My life was just falling apart right before me, and I didn't know really where to go. And so I decided what I was going to do is kill myself. And so I'm at work, and I'm thinking to myself, how do I get out of this deal? And from behind me, I hear this guy. And I had worked with Brian for about 3 years before this moment. And Brian was not only a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, he's something in addition to simply a member. Right? Brian was a step-working member of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a fundamentally different thing, which I didn't know about then. But I know about now, right? And so, why was that important? Why was that important to me in that hallway without ever being in Alcoholics Anonymous? Because if Brian had not done what Brian did, that is the steps out of the big book with the guidance of a sponsor, he would not have known how to talk to me. He would have likely handed me a meeting schedule and said, go to a bunch of meetings, keep coming back. And what he did is he shared his soul with me. He shared his own brokenness with me. He told me his story, right? And over time, in that hallway, we finally got to the big question. And the big question was, Mike, do you want to go to a meeting? And I lied to him and told him I did. And we went to this meeting that night, and I hated it, and I left. And I came back 6 weeks later, please God, to stay. And that was August 27th of 1991. And what Brian did is he brought me to people that had a solution and that lived a solution. They didn't just have one, they lived it, right? And they were active. This group in Chicago is called the Lamont Oaks Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. They meet in Palos Park on Monday nights, and I'm sure if you're ever out there, they would love to see you. And that was my first home group. And they have a newcomers meeting before the regularly scheduled AA meeting, and in those meetings you sat in red chairs. Because it was in a little cafeteria off the side of the gymnasium, and there was anywhere between 60 and 80 people that would be there when I would show up. And there was a little guy named Frank, he's an attorney out there, and he'd walk up and down the aisles and he'd ask you questions and talk to you about the big book. And at the end of that, you picked up your red chair and you went into the gymnasium and you sat there. And the reason they had you stay in the red chairs was so that the other 250 regular members who had over a year of sobriety, because you had to be in a red chair for your first year, could come up to you and say, hi, my name's so-and-so. Do you have a big book? Do you need a meeting scheduled? Do you have a sponsor? Right? They were amazing people. Shortly thereafter, I got moved out to South Dakota. I got promoted to work out in South Dakota, and I wasn't supposed to be there very long, about 6 months. But that's another, we'll get to that maybe in a bit. And I met this guy, Joe. And I went to meetings and met this guy, Joe. And Joe was great. I have no idea why, because Joe and I had nothing in common. You know, I hear this sometimes, right? When you're looking for a sponsor, find somebody you have something in common with. Right? The only thing I had in common with were the other people with 90 days of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. That was it, right? And Joe was seemingly so far ahead of me. Like, he had 7 years of sobriety when I met him, and that was like unfathomable to me. Like, how do you do that? But for some reason, when Joe would say it, I would understand it. I could be in a Step 3 meeting, and the whole room says something about Step 3, and Joe spoke, and I just understood what he meant. Just understood what he meant. So I'd start following him into meetings. And one day I said, hey, Joe, would you sponsor me? And he says, I don't know. Well, thank you. And he said, I'll tell you what, let's go for coffee. I'll tell you my story. At the end of that, you can tell me your story. And if we think we can work together after that, I'll sponsor you. And I thought, well, that's fair. So we went to this little coffee shop called the Crackpot. How ironic. And we sat there, and I'm chain smoking and chugging coffee, and he's telling me his story. And I'm sort of listening to it, but I'm really writing my own. You guys may have known somebody like that. And so he finishes, and then he says, tell me yours, and I start telling him mine, and he sort of cuts me off. Like, honestly, I'm like 3 minutes into it, just sort of rudely. And he goes, kid, you have no idea what alcoholism is, do you? And I said, well, yeah, I do. It's like when you're drunk a lot. And he said something that absolutely changed the way I looked at alcoholism and then recovery from it. He looked me right in the eyes, and he was deadpan serious when he said it. He said, drunkenness and alcoholism have nothing to do with each other. And I went, wait, what? I mean, it sounded like AA heresy, right? I mean, really. Truthfully, it did. I was like, this isn't landing, man. I don't know what you're talking about. He said, alcoholism is very different than drunkenness. You see, drunkenness, Mike, is your runny nose and your fever and your dysentery and your vomiting when you have the flu. But it ain't the virus. And we give you all kinds of medication to get rid of the dysentery and get rid of the fever and get rid of the body aches and get rid of all the chills. We can do all that. But it will never. All those medicines will never touch the virus. So alcoholism, drunkenness, is the symptom. All right? But that's not what the problem is. That's a failed attempt at creating a solution for what the real problem is. And he kind of had me a little bit. And he went into this thing, and he knew I was new, right? He didn't look down on me and talk about Silkworth and dates and, Ebby Thatcher's middle name is Throckmorton, and we just, he was just like, hey, this kid's dying. He doesn't even know what he has. He doesn't even know what he has. And as Joe sat there years later, he told me, and he didn't know if I had it. Like, that was important to Joe. That Joe knew I had alcoholism. So he took me on these series of questions, and we just walked through things I didn't know. I had no idea he was walking me through the doctor's opinion. He said, Mike, do you ever go out and not intend to be completely drunk and end up completely wasted? And I went, well, yeah. So why do you think that is? Did you really, really not want to get drunk? And I was like, yeah, I really, really didn't want to get drunk. And if you're here tonight, maybe that's your experience. Maybe your last 6 to 8 months or year of sobriety or drinking that you had out there, maybe it was like mine. I did not want to do the things, especially in that latter portion of my drinking, that I ended up doing nearly every single time. I didn't want that. I'd get bombed, and I'd do stuff, and I'd hurt people, and I would just, all the stuff. And the next day, I'd be like, how did that happen again? Okay, tonight, it's going to be different. Like, tonight, I'm not going to do that again. And I meant it. Like, I was sincere. I did not want to hurt the people I loved anymore. And no matter what I tried to do on my own power, I always ended up drunk. I always ended up doing things that hurt people I loved. And I did not want to be that guy. I couldn't figure out why I was that guy. And so the tables spun on me in some way. And they started just yelling at me. My head started yelling at me. You're a fraud. You're a fake. You're pathetic. People like you don't deserve a second chance. Look what you did last night. Look at. And all the evidence was before me, and I could do nothing but just examine it and go, guilty as charged. It was all right in front of me. Only to start the whole thing again over at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, promising I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to do that again. Not knowing that I have no inability to actually produce the result I was looking for. So he goes through this thing and he talks about an allergy. This idea that for some reason, and I don't know why, and I don't care why, I got it. And the allergy works like this, according to what Joe told me that day, and later what I found in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the doctor's opinion. That when this body, this physiology, maybe yours too, I don't know, especially the new people, I don't know. I truly don't know. I know I got it. That for some reason, when I take a drink or two, something happens inside of me that doesn't happen to the average temperate drinker. It just doesn't. And that is, it's almost a lust for more. There's something that is overwhelmingly powerful that happens inside of me that almost seemingly prohibits me from deciding whether I'm going to have another one. And when I will myself not to, the next night or the week later that I've willed myself not to, just to have a couple, because sometimes that was my case, the thoughts would spin and turn. And that was the second problem I had. The mind that lies to me. And my mind would go, well, look what you were able to handle it last night. So maybe it is okay to finish the fifth, Or it's okay, maybe you can have just one shot on top of the beers. Right? So I'm trying to manage it all. I'm trying to hold it at bay. Right? And the more I hold it at bay, the more twisted the lies become. But they're subtle. Because my wolves come to me as disguised as sheep. My alcoholism never said to me one time, Mike, if you drink tonight or you drink more tonight, you're going to hurt people you love. Never told me that. It never told me, Mike, if you drink tonight, you're going to spend more money than you have. Police are going to show. You're going to hurt her again. You're going to say things that are lies. It never told me any of that. It would say things like, why don't you leave at halftime? You know what? You got $20. Just leave when the $20 is spent. That's it. And of course, what would happen? Borrow 40 off Rich, right? I mean, that was my deal, right? It did anything it could to get me to just have another one. Until that allergy triggered itself, and I was off to the races then. It just took over. And that's when drunkenness occurred. See, when I came here, I was blaming drink 12 as my problem. Truthfully, honestly, that was my point of reference. And why wouldn't I? I was drunk regularly and often, and it seemingly was to the outside world the problem. Because the people who don't have alcoholism would give me great advice for a person who doesn't have alcoholism. They did. And it was heartfelt and sincere. And they would say things like, just have 2 or 3 and go home. First thought was like, why would you do that? And then the second thought was like, I'm going to try that. Maybe that'll work. Stay away from this, stay away from that, do this, do that. I mean, it was great advice for people who are non-alcoholic. It was horrible advice for me. But they could give me no other advice. Their point of reference was normal reaction to alcohol. So I'm sitting across from Joe, and he says, Mike, do you have an allergy to alcohol? And I said, yeah, apparently I do. And he said, you have this mind that lies to you. And I said, yeah, I think I do. And he said, well, that's good news. We're 2/3 of the way there. And by the way, Alcoholics Anonymous offers no solution for either one of those. And I went, wait a minute, wait, say that again? No solution. We're not doctors. We can't fix your body. And again, I'm sure it doesn't happen out here. But in South Dakota, some of our members believe we're counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. We are not. We are not. We're not. Can't fix your brain. Can't fix your body. So I looked at Joe and I said, well, then what are we doing here? Seriously, that was an honest question. He's walked me down. This is several conversations. He's walked me down to this point of what do we do then? He said, we only work on the third part. And I said, what's that? And he said, that's your broken soul. And I went, wow. He had me. He had me. See, like I said a few moments ago, something was wrong with Mike way before booze. Booze simulated what God has done for me. Booze was the great impersonator to give me peace. It was a false peace, but a peace from all the stuff that happens in regular life that I have no capacity to manage or handle. So when I get stir crazy from the regular trials and tribulations of life, and the knots would set themselves in my gut, and I'd take just a drink or two, I would get this. I got this all the time, at 1 or 2. I'm not talking about drunk. After 1 or 2, that allergy would trigger and I'm off to the races. And it looked like that was the problem. That was an inevitability. Not the problem. The problem was right here. Right here where I could not live. And so Joe began to continue to talk to me about this. This idea that we have a threefold disorder, some threefold sickness or malady or whatever the word is we want to use, right? And I bought it. I got that. And there were times where I felt like I really had it, and then I'd almost feel myself like talking myself out of it, right? And I'd go to a meeting and I'd hear your stories. And I'd listen to CDs by Sandy and Chuck and Bob B. and my sponsor Don M. And I would listen to these guys and they would talk about this thing that's broken in us. And I would I would be pulled to it. I would be pulled to it. And what I didn't know is the message that could interest and hold this alcoholic had to have depth and weight. That another message of not drinking and showing up at meetings was the answer had no depth and weight to me. It was something deeper and bigger than that. And those stories that I kept hearing and listening to eventually began to teach me what was wrong with me. And I got to a place that I figured out in Alcoholics Anonymous and sober that I could not fix that problem on my own power or with my own wisdom or with my own efforts. And Joe said, it's time to move on to step 2. Tell me about God. And I said, well, he must be big and he must be nice. You know? And he said, why big? And I said, well, when I go outside, I see the stuff like trees and I see the sky and all that. And if he made all that, I don't know, I think he must be bigger than that. And he said, why nice? And I said, well, I can kind of tell that I don't really deserve a second chance. But somehow I sort of feel like he's given me one. And he was giving me one. And I hope he's given you one. Tonight, even if no nights before tonight, he's given us a second chance right now. He's given all of us a second chance right now. So we got on our hands and knees. He said, that's fine. Step 2's done. We'll come back to that in the detail. He wanted me to get into the work. Right? He didn't want me to know big book knowledge. He wanted me to do big book work. Right? And if eventually I'd acquire the knowledge, even better. But as my old sponsor used to say, knowledge is the booby prize in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's great. Nothing against it. Like, I love it, man. I love the history. I love all that stuff. But what I needed to do as a dying alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous was the work. And if we postponed the work until I could get the knowledge, we're talking weeks or months. Like, let's go. Do you have this? Yes, then let's work on the solution. So we got down on our hands and knees at this room, at this Alano Club. And we said the third step prayer. And after we finished it, he said, I don't want you believing for a second that what you did was the third step. What you did was say a prayer. The proof you've done the third step is whether you do 4 through 9. That the third step is a public declaration, a verbal declaration to God that you're willing to work the rest of the process. And so we got up off our hands and knees, and he handed me a piece of paper and a pen, and I wrote down my 4th step, and that was resentment, fears, and sex conduct. And when that was over, we went back to that sex conduct part, and he asked me to ask myself some questions. What should I have done instead? Was it selfish or not? What should I have done instead? And to write all that down. What I should have done instead. And from that gleaning bit of information, I was to shape what Joe called, and what I later found out was in the big book, a sane and sound ideal for my future sex life. It's all on page 69 to 70, right? And in each one of those, there were prayers. It's interesting in the resentment prayer, and I hear people say this all the time, right? And God, believe me, no stones, right? Like, that is pray for the people you resent. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. Like, you'll never hear me talk anybody out of praying for the people they resent. That's a really, really good thing for sure. But in our big book, you know what it tells me to pray for? Me. It says, God, save me from being angry. Show me how I might be helpful to them. I'm supposed to be helpful to the people I resent? You got to be kidding me. No, not kidding. Right? Fear prayers, sex prayers. Right? And then I was to take this stuff that I had written down and go see this guy who was a Catholic priest. I was born and raised Catholic. And wasn't the poster boy for the Catholic Church, not at all. And but nonetheless, right, that's what I understood. And so I sat there with this priest and I talked to him for about 6 hours. And his name was Father Ed. And at the end of that 5th step, he said, Mike, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah, can you make it quick, Father? I've been here 6 hours. I got to get going. And he said, I only have one question for you. And he said to me, which I think is perfectly fine to say to a Catholic, right? He looked me right in the eye and he said, what's your problem with Jesus? Now, I don't know how you guys are. I just know if you ask me a question, right, and I don't have an answer for you, I feel morally obligated to make one up on the spot. Like, no thought process, just start moving your lips and stuff comes out, right? So I say to him, right, I say, I'll tell you what my problem is. No idea what my problem is, but I'm going to say it, right? I said, okay, all right. So in Alcoholics Anonymous, Father, we have this book. It's called The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you pinch it together, it's like that big, right? And now you, this poor guy who gave me 6 hours of his life, suddenly he becomes you, right? You're going to take the Bible, which is like this big, and you're going to whack this off my head. And I said, Father, if I can't do this, I could never do that. And I smugly crossed my arms and leaned back in my chair. And this guy, I'm not kidding you, put his head in his hands. And he come up and there was a little tear in his eye for me. Not kidding. And he goes, you missed it. You missed it by a mile. And I said, what's that? And he goes, after 8 years of Catholic grammar school, 4 years of Catholic high school, a year and a half of Catholic college, right? You missed it. And he does the motion back to me. And he says, Mike, this isn't the story of what you do for God. After all that time, you missed it, pal. This is the story of what God has done for you. And I was like something hit me. I didn't know what he meant. I didn't know how it all worked. I still don't know how it all works. All I know is that whatever he was talking about became desirous for me to have. I don't know why. I just know that it did. So I left. I told Joe. He went, great. Let's move on. And 6 and 7, right? So we went back to the book. And he said, Mike, are you ready to let God remove from you all the things which you have just admitted are objectionable? Oh, can he take them all, every one? And I went, no, not at all. Not at all, man. And he said, good, that's fine. The book doesn't cast judgment on us in 6. It's a yes or no question. Are you willing to let God take them all, every one, or not? Some of them I was. I was so sick and tired of some of the stuff, he could have it right away. Other stuff, as we heard earlier, I didn't know who I would be without them. I didn't know who I would be without certain fears or certain character defects that helped me feel comfortable in social settings or some snarky, sarcastic level of humor or whatever it might have been. I didn't know what I would be without those tools that I had used for living. He said, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about that right now. If you don't have the willingness to let God take them, step 6 tells us to pray for the willingness we don't have and then move on. It doesn't say stay there. So we did that. We said the 7-step prayer. He said grab a piece of paper and write down the names off your 4-step and put them on your 8-step and start praying for willingness. And I did that for a couple of weeks. And then bam, we were into it. This is months. This isn't years. It's months. And I remember being in a meeting one time, and I heard some people say that they were, walking through the mall, and a person they had hurt in kindergarten had been walking the other way, and they just sort of knew that God was calling them to make the amend in that moment. It was all ordained and orchestrated by the spheres. It was amazing. And so I thought, I'm living in Sioux Falls now. I have all these amends to make in Chicago. It's clear that someday I'll be walking through the mall in Sioux Falls. And God will place these people right before me. Joe thought a little different. He had a little different angle. He said something to me, and he said, Mike, you went out of your way to harm these people. You must go out of your way to make it right. So I started on a journey. I would leave work at 5:30 in the afternoon on Friday, and I'd drive to Chicago. And on Saturday, I'd make amends for as many people as I could meet and find. And Joe told me to come back, leave about noon on Sunday because I had to be at work on time Monday morning. And I did that for months. Finding people that were on my A-step, whether they were friends, neighbors, family members, teachers, students, whatever it was. I did the best I could with those, right? And I remember I was worried about money because I didn't have any. I hadn't filed federal income tax in 3 or 4 years prior to joining Alcoholics Anonymous. 4 years. Or Illinois state tax. I found a guy in the program who was an accountant. He helped me with all that. We got all that worked out, and I kept sending checks. And I got to tell you, I sent them for 3.5 years, and there was only 2 checks I actually wanted to send. The first one, so I could brag to Joe that I was doing it. Just being honest, right? With no high moral ground. Now I see my ill ways. No, it wasn't that. Right? And the last one, because I wanted freedom. But I'm telling you that every single month when those checks came, when I get my check and I knew I had to mail one off to the IRS, I would think to myself, it's not going to work. There's going to be too much month and not enough money left. I won't be able to eat. Certainly that hasn't been a problem. And there was a problem. Like, it was going to make the car payment. Like, there's all these things that I thought were going to happen. None of them ever took place once. It was almost as if I just continued the journey, God would take care of me. I had no idea that was one of the lessons I was learning from the 9th step. I had no idea that. If I can trust the process in some way, that means I'm trusting God. I didn't know that. I wrote a letter to my dad, and I went to his grave, and I told him that I was really sorry for the life I had lived up to this point. He was a man of integrity and a man of honor, and I had none of it. And I took the good Donnelly name, and I flushed it a little bit. Hard to flush a name like that, but I gave it my all because he was such a good guy. And I got to tell you, I didn't see anything at that grave. I didn't have like some vision or anything like that. I'm just telling you that I walked away from that grave having talked to my dad and did some weeping at that grave. When I walked away, I felt more whole and more connected to my father than I ever had in my entire life. You see, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, as you might remember, I came here to not drink because I thought drinking was my problem. But Joe would not settle for me just being sober in AA. He wanted me to have something different. He wanted me to have a new freedom and a new happiness. And the only way I could get those things, according to Joe, was if I worked 1 through 9. And so that process suddenly began to unfold. And suddenly I was a taxpayer. I didn't come here to be a taxpayer, guys. I did not. Right? Suddenly I became a son to my dad. And if I would have settled for just sobriety, I would have never been a son. I went to my mom and I told her what I had done with the money, and I paid her back. But it just didn't connect. You know, it just was hard. And I said to Joe, I said, it's not working with my mom. And he said, when you go home, I want you to hug her. So I went home for Thanksgiving one time. And I put my arms around my mom's back, and she just did this. She was so, I don't know. I mean, I could only guess what she was. And then he said, well, go back at Christmas and do it again. I said, my mom and I don't hug. He said, I'm not talking to your mother. I'm telling you to hug your mother. What your mother does is none of my business. So I went home at Christmas and I did the same thing. I went home at St. Patrick's Day, which he told me to do the same thing again. And I can bring you to the spot in my mom's house. If you walk in my mom's front door, which is where I grew up, and you go about 4 steps in, there's a hallway to your right, and that leads down to the bedrooms. To the left is the living room. But right in that T of the hallway, right smack dab in the middle of that T, I hugged my mom when I went home for St. Patrick's Day, and I could feel her arms come up behind my lower back and hug me back. See, I came to AA to not drink, and you guys would have none of that. Thank God. Thank you. For as much as I pushed back, thank you. I became a son in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I became a son, I'm not sure exactly how this all takes place, but I can tell you that I looked at women very, very differently. And when I made amends to the women that I had hurt out there, and by the way, in a crowd like this, there's maybe a lot of girls that were hurt by selfish guys. Maybe not, but maybe. And I got to tell you, when I made amends to those women for doing things that I'm not really proud of today, I began to look at women different. I began to see them differently. They're not objects. They're here for more than just my viewing pleasure. Right? They're people. They're God's children and God's daughters. And they should be treated that way. And I saw that in the eyes of some of the ladies that I talked to during the amends process. There was a priest that I had gone to school with. He was very gracious to me. And I got very drunk one night, and I was very rude to this guy, and it's a long story. I don't want to necessarily tell the whole thing, but I grabbed a bunch of beer bottles and I threw them at this poor priest's feet. And I poked him in the chest at this college dance, and I said, Father, when I tell you to dance, I mean dance. And I began to throw these bottles at this priest's feet so he would jump up and down to the music and dance. How do you make amends for a deal like that? Humiliating him in front of these students, and humiliating him in front of his fellow professors and his fellow teachers and administrators. Like, I don't know. And Joe said, I don't need to know. My job is to call him and tell him I'm sorry and ask him how to do that. And I couldn't find the guy, and I wandered around 2 different campuses looking for this guy, and I talked to other administrators that I knew had known him, and they sort of lost track of him. And one night I'm praying in my basement, and he just pops into my head. So I dialed 411 in New Lenox, Illinois, and sure enough, the number comes back. And the phone rings, and this guy picks up the phone, and I said, Father Phil, this is Michael Donnelly. I don't know if you remember me. He's like, yeah, I remember you. And he didn't say it like that. He was gracious. But I told him I was sorry. And I told him, look, I have no idea how to make this right. And he said, we'll get back to that. Tell me about you. What are you doing? Why are you calling? And I said, well, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm trying to live a different life, and blah, 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 blah. And he said, I have some friends that are in AA. I said, really? He said, yeah. He says, this is your amend to me, right? And I go, yeah. And he said, all right, so you can do two things for me to make this right. One is if you ever think this story will help anybody make amends in their life, go tell it. How about that? He was willing, right, to allow me humiliating him to be a vehicle to potentially help someone else make amends. Right? And the second thing, Mike, if you could do this for me, and I still do this, and I'll do it tonight. He said, anytime you tell that story, would you pray for me and my family that night? So tonight when I go home and I get on my hands and knees, or upstairs, I guess, and I thank God for giving me another day of sobriety and for putting me with you guys tonight, I'm going to ask Him to bless Father Phil and his family. Right? It's true, we're not saints, but it is also true, I think, that we are surrounded by them. We just can't see them. Like, what a disposition in this guy. So I'd have missed all of that if I'd have settled for a longer meeting schedule. Right? And, 4,000 meetings in 24 hours. Like, I would have just, and I'm not mocking meetings, man. I swear to you, I'm not. I love meetings. I met them all the time. Like, I love meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just never going to save my life. It's just not. Alcoholics Anonymous, according to Joe, was what I did in between the meetings. Alcoholics Anonymous was what I did when I wasn't at a meeting. Alcoholics Anonymous was not what I heard or said in a meeting. It was what I did when I left the meeting. Did I take what I heard, saw, or read at that meeting and apply it to my life when I'm not there? Who am I when you're not with me? Because truthfully, folks, this is the God's truth. If I can get you to think something of me tonight and I go home and my wife feels unloved, I have failed in Alcoholics Anonymous. If I go to a meeting and I say something really clever and get the whole room to giggle or laugh or think, whoa, that was really deep, Mike. And the door hits my backside on the way out and none of it's true, I failed in Alcoholics Anonymous. At least for that moment. But every moment I got a chance to turn that around. If that's who I have been or that's who I'm pretending to be, I got a chance to turn it around in that moment and become authentic. If I'll just pick up that book under the guidance of a sponsor and pick up where I left off. Start over again. 10 and 11 to me are all about the moment, man. They're all about the moment. Our book says we continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear in step 10. And when these crop up, I'm supposed to do 4 things. I don't know about you, but this is how I look at that. This is how I think about that. That I'm just sort of living life, man. I'm just out there doing my thing. I'm at work. I'm at home. I'm with the family. I'm playing with my grandkids. I'm doing whatever. And stuff just comes into my head. Stuff I don't want in my head. Anybody with me on that? It's not I'm not going to look for it, right? The bastards just show up, right? It's what I do with that. It says when they crop up. You know when they crop up? Not at 10 o'clock at night when I'm doing my 10-step inventory. They've just cropped up not like now. Right? What am I supposed to do? It says, ask God to remove them. Talk to someone immediately. Make amends quickly if I've harmed anyone. And the kicker of all kickers, resolutely turn my thoughts to someone I can help. The answer to those thoughts in my head, at least for this guy, is to try to live in the moment with God. And when these things derail me, put me back on track right now with those actions. The guys I sponsor, it's the same thing we talk about, right? They'll call me up, hey, Mike, this is happening, that's happening. I can't believe what she said. You wouldn't believe how my boss looked at me, publicly humiliated me, whatever it is. Did you ask God to remove it? No. Okay, I'll hold. Right? Really, I'm just being honest. Like, that is not how I sponsored like 10 years ago at all. 10 years ago, if you'd have called me with a resentment, fear, selfish, whatever it was, dishonesty, you'd have gotten a lecture on what that's about. Right? Well, let me tell you about fear. Blah, 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 blah. But he's calling me because he's afraid. He already knows about fear. When these things happen, I shouldn't be pointing them to me. Especially since I admitted in step 1, I can't solve my problem like I'm going to be able to solve his. I got to point them to the one who can. And that ain't me. That ain't me. I said, okay, prayer sometimes is said out loud, sometimes it's quiet. Great, you called me, there's two. Did you do anything stupid that you need to make amends for? Yes, go make it. No, let's move on. How about this one? Resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. I got to tell you, the men I sponsor have taught me more about Alcoholics Anonymous than I have ever taught them. Ever. Hands down, not even close. Because what I found out is things like back rubs and playing catch with your kid in the backyard and wrapping Christmas presents on the 23rd of December instead of panicking about how you don't have anything. I'm serious. Resolutely turn your thoughts to someone you can help. These are things that I've heard my guys say to me. I can help my son by playing catch with him, let him know he's loved. Playing catch is an Alcoholics Anonymous? Darn right. Back rubs for your wife? Darn right. Right? Paying that bill that just sort of hung out there for... Darn right. Darn right. Saying a prayer for the people who don't like you? Darn right. Calling your mom and telling her you love her? Darn right. I had no idea that these things were part of the 10-step because of that thing, that last sentence, right? That last part. Resolutely turn your thoughts to someone you can help. The implication is that once our thoughts are turned, we actually go do it. I just want to point that out, right? And it's like, yes, there are a lot of people I could help. Anyways, back to me. Like, that's not what we're saying. Right? Like, really do it. And then this idea, step 11. Am I okay there, Mikey? Okay. Like prayer and meditation. So my prayer and meditation started out on a softball field. I was sober about 6 weeks, and the group I was at in Chicago had a old-timers versus newcomers softball game. And at the end of the game, oh, it was great. It was awesome, yeah. And at the end, we all had jerseys on, right? You paid like $15 to show up at the game, right? And they had a big barbecue, and then everybody had a little jersey. I had class of '91, right? And that was all. My whole dugout had class of '91 on it. We were the new people, and the other one had class of '78 and class of '86 and class of '90, and they were all. And at the end of the game, we all got on our. We all went onto the softball field and held hands and said the Lord's Prayer. Out in public, like people could see us. It was weird. And I got this out of my mouth, Our Father, and I couldn't get any further. And I opened my eyes and I looked around this circle, and all these people who were holding hands, and so I just remember thinking, who are these people? Who are these people? In that moment, they sort of emulated the kind of person that I wanted to be but could never pull off. Could never really be like that. And that was how step 11 started for me. I couldn't even get the prayer out. I could only get Our Father out. In meetings, you taught me to say the Serenity Prayer. You taught me to say the Our Father. Joe taught me the 3rd and 7th step prayer, the 6th step prayer, all these little prayers that are salt and pepper through the big book. We talked about the resentment, fear, and sex conduct prayers. All salt and pepper through the book. They're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. And it gets to step 11, and I'm supposed to look at my day and ask God to direct my thinking. You know, that it be divorced from selfishness, dishonesty, all these things, right? Self-pity, make foolish decisions. How I do this, and this isn't right. This isn't the way it would work for you, I don't know. But it works for me this way. Some days I get up and my heart, everything inside of me is just pumping, man. It's beating like a drum. And I got to slow down. Right? So I just get to sit. And over time, not like a week into it, like over time. Really. With effort and sweat and thoughts that it was never going to work and get better, and thoughts that this is a waste of time, and hey, this is crazy. What are people going to think? This is stupid. This isn't working. Over time, in spite of all of those thoughts, I've been able to just calm myself. Just calm myself. Because of who I believe is sitting with me. Not willful calming of my innards. I've never been able to pull that off. God bless people who can. I can't get there. So I think about this idea that God's sitting with me. And I think about this idea that He's here to allow me to feel comfort in the world that He made. And I take a few deep breaths, and maybe there's some other things that I pray. Usually there are. And I just sit and just sort of calm myself. And I ask Him to just help me walk through the day with love as my motivator to the people that He has put in my life. In our book, it says that we're in the world to play the role that He assigns. So one day we were thinking about that. Me and some guys, some friends of mine, were talking about this. What is the role that God has assigned for me? What is that role? God bless somebody. I hear this all the time. You can never know what God's will is. That might be true. But we can guess. Right? And I suspect that we can guess probably pretty well. Right? Like, I have no idea why God's will is that Saturn has a ring on it, or that we're in the Milky Way, right? I have no idea about that stuff. But here's what I do know. My wife has one husband. That's it. And I would suspect that He has called no one else on planet Earth except me to love her like a husband should love a wife. I suspect that might be, can't know for sure, right? That might be part of God's will. I have 2 stepsons. I suspect that God wants me to be an engaged parent with them, to listen to them, to sit with them, to just talk to them about their life and what they want to be when they grow up. They're grown up now. But who they want to be as parents and who they want to be as people and what their career paths. Listen to them. And that's hard for me because I want to give them advice. I don't want to listen. Right? I want to tell them how to do it. Right? Because I love them, not because I'm an idiot only. Right? Only. It's because I love them. I got to calm that down. So what I found is this part of step 11 for me is trying to stay in the moment and being in communication with God. There was a book that our founders read sometimes called The Practice of the Presence of God. It's by a guy named Brother Lawrence. And Brother Lawrence talked about how to stay in the moment with God in conversation. Just trying to constantly converse with God in the moment. That keeps us connected to Him. And so when I'm talking to one of my sons or when I'm talking to my wife, I'm trying to pray. Dear God, help me love her. Dear God, let me listen to what she's trying to say. Dear God, help me listen to him. Dear God, he's confused about his marriage or his career, or he's frustrated with the kids, or he's having a bad day with his boss. Just help me listen. And, sometimes if he's like me or my wife's like me, it's hard to bring God into those things. So maybe that's my job. Maybe my job is to bring God to all the relationships I have as best I can, as imperfectly as I can. Right? As hard as it is. Maybe that's just my job. Right? To just not have the right answers, but to bring the one who has the right answers into the relationship. Maybe. But that's a lot better than the way it used to be. And I don't do it perfectly, and I'm not trying to paint an image like I'm spiritual. Like that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to be honest with you about how I try to work this program. And I'm telling you, I don't do it extraordinarily well or perfectly. I fail at it all the time. But I truly want to be the man that God made me to be. Not the guy who crash landed in Alcoholics Anonymous 28 years ago. I just don't want to be that guy anymore. And I know I can't change me. And I believe in my heart that God's will for me is to love the people that He has placed in my life. To be a conduit for Him to love them. As it relates to my relationship with Him. And I think that's what step 12 is all about. I really do. Because those new people, Joe loved me like God loved me. I just couldn't see God, so He sent Joe. It's true. How do I know Joe loved me like God did? Because Joe told me the truth. I think God's about truth. How do I know Joe loved me like God did? Because he never let up on me. He wanted more for me than I wanted for myself. That sounds like God to me. Right? He wouldn't let me halfway work this thing. He pushed me to go further. He pushed me against my comfort level. He pushed me past my sense of complacency to try just a little bit more and go a little bit deeper. Right? That's why I think Joe loved me like God loved me. And I think if Joe did that for me, it's one of the reasons I'm standing here. And if it's a reason I'm standing here, I have an obligation and a debt to pay. And if we've heard already, my old sponsor, Keith Lewis, Keith used to say, I'll be paying debts back to Alcoholics Anonymous for the rest of my life, and I'll never take a penny off the principal. You know, he's right. He's right. Everything I have in my life today comes directly from the experiences and the wisdom and the knowledge that I've gained in Alcoholics Anonymous because of a loving God who gave them to me. I got to tell you, the best place on planet Earth for me these days is hanging out with my grandkids. I'm Bappa. Love being Bappa, man. It's the greatest. And their mom is so wonderful, my daughter-in-law. And I think to myself, how can I love my daughter-in-law better? What does she need from me? I don't know. That gets to be a hard question sometimes. I don't know necessarily the answer to that. But those kids, man, I could play hide and seek for hours with them. I could just sit and let them crawl on me. We do this thing where they jump on my back and I'm Radish the horse. And yeah, so we were having dinner one time and I mentioned horseradish, and my granddaughter kind of went and swipped it around because I always give them like horse rides, you know. So she takes this long athletic shoe, this big white cord, wraps it around my neck, kind of chokes me a little bit, you know. Which I'm willing to be choked for my grandchildren. It's no problem at all. So instead of horseradish, she rattled it around. Horse, oh, okay. So I became Radish the horse, right? So we wandered around there on my back, right? And my wife says, oh, look at the horse, you know. What's your name, horse? And I said, Radish. And my granddaughter just yanks that thing, chokes me. Horses don't talk, Grandpa. Yeah, that's true. Forgot about that. You know, it's just awesome, man. It's just absolutely awesome. I love Alcoholics Anonymous because it gave me an opportunity to become a son, to become a father, to become a husband, to become a taxpayer, right? To be a regular human being, which is pretty special when you were less than that when you came in. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think that if I can improve on anything, it would be trying to live in that moment so that I can be filled with God. Because when I'm filled with God, I don't have to steal love from you. I'm full. I don't have to get you to think something of me to feel complete. I don't have to try to get you to love me. I can just be, because He's loving me. And I'm full. And here's what's weird. He's so abundant, I got plenty to give you. I won't get hurt. I won't lose in the deal. Right? I'm the gaunt prospector, man. And my pick has struck gold. Right? And I'll be able to mine it for the rest of my life as long as I do what Joe taught me. Give every bit of it away. If you're here tonight and it's your first meeting, you are so welcome, and I'm so glad you're here, brother. 12 days, right? And 8. And then what was the other one? 2. God bless you guys. And everybody in between up to 53, right? 63 or 53? 53. Oh, only 53. I'm sorry. I really don't know why I came here. Amazing, right? Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. So what you guys taught me was that I'm supposed to try to grow in the image and likeness of my Creator. That's what our 12 and 12 says. And I think that's about loving people. And if I can stay filled with God and I can let Him love the people who He put in my life, if I can be the conduit for His love to them, I think that's recovery. It may not be, but I think that's what it is, at least tonight. God bless you all. Have a great evening. Thank you for my life.